Welcome to All Grown Up Now, a tale of retail, relocation, revenge, reinvention, reckless behavior, really good clothes, indiscretion, infidelity, domestic violence, and one kidnapping. I'm Kenneth D. King, podcasting from my studio near Union Square in New York City. This podcast is another in a series of installments from a novel I wrote called All Grown Up Now, A Friendship in 3 Acts, available on Amazon.com. It's the story of a small-town boy who dreams of being a grown-up and his journey to get there. Each week, you'll hear another installment of this story. I am pleased to announce that BearWorldMagazine.com will be one of the sponsors of all of the episodes going forward. In the last episode, Ken opened his big fancy studio on Howard Street with a big-ass party. Elton John sent flowers and congratulations. Episode 17, Neuroses and Nostalgia. The time, early 1990. The place, San Francisco. After the holidays, I flew back to San Francisco. I needed to oversee the contractor who I had engaged to build divider walls for the new space. Since we had rented it the day before the earthquake, and from a new landlord, I needed to get building permits. Now, this was unusual. My contractor said that he usually came and went in a week, but the permits were another animal. I had visited the Department of Public Works every single day before and after my trip to OKC. There was one day that I was so desperate to get that damn permit that I brought knee pads thinking that sucking some dick might be called for. That was the day I coincidentally got the permit. So no, my virtue remained intact. With all of this activity, I should have been making more of an effort, but I was out of sorts. It was because of the trip to OKC, and more specifically, my conversations or lack of them with Mom. Miss Ann was determinedly not going to discuss anything deep, and I felt a little frustrated. Also, the harsh words I needed to use to get her to come to the party were also weighing on me. Just why exactly did I have to go so ballistic? I understood a little that she felt shy about meeting my friends, but there seemed to be more here. Increasingly, I didn't want to do anything. I should have busied myself with settling into the new studio. There were walls to build and organizing to do, but I couldn't make myself do it. I was becoming angry, and I didn't know why. All I wanted to do was to throw chairs through walls for no reason, which scared me. So, I decided to get into therapy to figure out what was going on. Now, this was a big step for me, as I was wary of therapy and therapists. Living in California all those years, I had met people for whom therapy was a lifestyle choice, seeing the same therapist for years and years and not making any decisions without the weekly consult. They seemed not to actually get any better. So I decided that, to be comfortable with the idea of engaging in the process, I wanted to give it a time limit, 1 year. With that time limit, I began my search. I asked around. It seemed everyone was in therapy, so there were quite a few recommendations, which I interviewed. Happily, I got lucky and found a guy named Dennis who really nailed what I was after on the first visit. He understood that I was not looking to become a permanent fixture in his practice, but wanted to do my work and eventually go on my way. I didn't tell him of my time limit, though. I liked him a lot. He was gay and thankfully not incredibly good-looking, which meant I wouldn't spend time lusting after him or trying to make him like me. Better still, he was a good listener who made insightful comments and also laughed at my jokes, something my ex would never do. For anyone in therapy, you know the way one feels when embarking on that particular journey. What I was looking at was the denial I had gotten into, especially about Mom and growing up. Although I remembered what had gone on during my childhood and adolescence, somehow I didn't want to actually face some of the underlying reasons for Mom's behavior, i.e., she was a little crazy and liked being cruel. Mom wasn't stupid, but she was cruel and crazy and thoughtless and self-absorbed. I also realized that if she thought she might have had a choice, She might not have had children. In my mind, I had built up a romanticized picture of her, so I didn't have to face this. Therapy is where I first started calling her Miss Ann. Dennis suggested it as a way of detaching the person from the role of mother. For the first couple of weeks, I felt like the force of gravity had doubled, and nobody told me. This alternated with some tremendous anger directed at Miss Ann. I didn't want to talk to her on the phone, and was able to keep her at arm's length for a time because of the time difference and the distance. There came a point, though, when Mom noticed and started asking questions. So I decided to write her a short note telling her that I was in therapy right now, and for a time, I didn't want to have contact. I would let her know when I was ready. Next therapy session. At the session after I mailed the note, Dennis asked, "What do you think will happen?" "Oh, she'll call," I said. "Really?" "Yeah, that's her style." And she did. It was a Friday, and the phone rang, and I looked at the clock, which meant it was 12 noon, which meant 2 o'clock in OKC. She would be at work and therefore wouldn't be calling me. So it was safe to answer. I picked up the phone, only to hear her voice. I made an excuse, and I got off the phone in a hurry. The next therapy session. "So, what do you think will happen now?" Dennis asked. "Well, if she called me at noon on Friday, she wasn't at work. She would never call from work. And that meant she was home, sick, and I made her sick with that note. It was all my fault." "So what's next?" he asked. "She'll be in the hospital by Monday." "Really?" "Yeah, it's a family trait. Grandma used to do that too." Kathy called me that evening. Mom was in the hospital. She went in with the terrible back pain, which was the result of a fractured vertebra. This was the result of cancer from her lungs and liver, which had metastasized throughout her body. They gave her 3 to 6 months, and this was March 3rd of 1990. To back up a little, she'd been in the hospital about 6 months earlier, and they had seen a spot on her liver and on her lungs in the x-rays. When I was back at Christmas, I asked her about it, had she had it checked out. She assured me that she had, and it was nothing. This explains the gift of the compact, and her words, "Ken, I want you to have these now while I can see you enjoy them." She knew. I don't know that for a fact, but I believe she knew. And I have a theory. She didn't pursue any treatment because the chemotherapy would have made her hair fall out. Since the hair was a major part of her identity in her presentation, I think she felt that she was a goner, but she'd go out with her hair. And now that I'm around her age, when she died, I completely understand. Mark called one day that first week when I was dealing with Mom's imminent death. I was on my hands and knees scrubbing the studio floor. It was a way to get the floor clean and physically work through some of my sadness and confusion about Mom's upcoming death. That's what I do when I need to sort things through. I clean or I organize. Somehow it helps. After the hellos, Mark asked me what was new. I told him about Mom's cancer, expecting him to be sympathetic. His own mother, Sophie, had died of it. Foolish me. In my weakened state, I had forgotten that Mark had disappeared into his relationship with Victor and wouldn't be able to get past his own concerns, even for me. Instead of sympathy, I got another earful of Victor's latest misdeeds. Leaning against my desk while listening to this diatribe, I looked longingly at the bucket and scrub brush and thought how I'd much prefer scrubbing the floor to listening to this again. I got off the phone in a hurry. I was losing my mother and had already lost a friend. Mark's voice was still there on the telephone, but the person was gone. He couldn't be there for me anymore. His world and his awareness had disappeared into this relationship with Victor. Next therapy session. She's in the hospital. Wow. Boy, you really know how to call it, Dennis said. Where does it go from here? She's gonna fucking die before I get these issues resolved, I shouted. And eventually she did. I was a churchgoer during this time, but it wasn't a normal church. It was called Amron Metaphysical Center, and it was housed in this big blue Victorian house on the corner of Van Ness and Vallejo. Norma was the founder and the very charismatic driving force of this church, and she had taken me under her wing several years before. Now, Susan was my glamorous Jewish mother, but Norma was my beautiful guru mother. In many ways, Norma was really more mother than Mom was. That happens sometimes. Went to church the Sunday after I heard about Mom's cancer and told Norma what was up. She was a bit surprised because she had met Mom at the party in December. Then she looked at me and said, "Get there within the next 10 days." After I came home from church and made travel arrangements, I decided to call Grandma to see how she was taking the news. Grandma didn't seem to be too upset. I assumed that it was because she had lost one child, my Uncle Herb, to cancer already. "So, are you going to go see her?" I asked. "Kathy tells me Mom's asking for you." "Well, I can't ride in a car for very long, what with my arthritis." "What?" I shouted. "Are you kidding me?" "Here's your Aunt Helen." Grandma passed the phone to Aunt Helen, who was there. "So, are you going to see her?" I asked. "Well, I'm short of help at the liquor store," she responded. I let a few beats skip. "Wow, what I'm hearing here is that it's inconvenient. You own the store. You could close your doors," I stated evenly. "She doesn't have a case of the flu. She's going to die. She's asking for you." My reaction confused them. The standard reaction in the Yockers family would have been to say something like, "Oh, I understand, and that's okay." But I was living in California and doing therapy now. I wasn't in the mood to play this game. The change of script threw both of them. Calling it like it was definitely wasn't in the script. Grandma grabbed the phone. "Listen, Buster, we don't have to take this. We're your family, and we're all you've got. You just have to be okay with this. You shouldn't be questioning your elders." Now, that was a side of Grandma that I had never seen, only heard about from Mom. Telling me that I had no say here and shouldn't have been questioning them, how dare I do that, on something like this made me furious. "There's a right thing and a wrong thing to do," I shouted. "You know the difference." Then I slammed down the phone. And for myself, I also knew there was a right thing and a wrong thing to do. On the one hand, I was furious with Mom for her gratuitous cruelty. We were looking at that in therapy. And part of me wanted revenge. This was the ultimate revenge, being mean to her, denying my presence and comfort when she was deathly ill. But, on the other hand, I didn't want to be like her. Venting my anger, or worse yet, not going to see her, was, well, cruel. No two ways to look at it. And I didn't want to be cruel just because she was. But again, I had drawn a line in the sand where I wanted no contact until I was ready, and now look where I was. I didn't want this to be yet one more manipulation to get me back in line. The next therapy session. "Your plane reservations are for the day after tomorrow," Dennis said. "What are you going to do?" We talked, and I came to a solution that I could live with. I would go, and in my mind, it wasn't my mother I was going to see, but this scared, lonely old woman who was dying. She needed comforting, and that's what I would do. I realized that eventually, since I was obviously going to outlive her, I could get my issues resolved, and I would grow to regret behaving cruelly if I were to do so. I would honor the idea of mother. I understood that she wouldn't have some epiphany and totally understand me, and we'd be all good and healed and happy. This wasn't about me at all. It was about her. And it was about making sure she was as comfortable and felt secure as I could do. So I would go and do what was necessary to make her feel comfortable and comforted, to ease her transition as best I could. It was the right thing to do. Not what I was feeling right then, but it was the right thing to do. Kathy and I talked over the phone several times before I went back, and we both came to the conclusion that we could learn something valuable from this experience if we just paid attention. We were already seeing how Mom's family was reacting to her illness and imminent death, and we were learning from that. Kathy picked me up at the airport, and we went immediately up to the hospital to see Mom. On the drive to the hospital, Kathy told me of an experience she had with Mom the night before that sounded like a past life flashback. It seems Mom was sitting up in bed and told Kathy that they were serving lobster on the lower deck, and could Kathy go get her some? Kathy played along, asking all sorts of questions, which Mom answered. It seemed that Mom was in her stateroom on a luxury liner. She even pointed out where the closet was and the vanity table. She was traveling in a stateroom on one of the upper decks, and they were serving lobster. Could Kathy go get her some? Now, Mom was deathly afraid of water and never would have entertained the idea of setting foot on a boat. She was even skittish about driving over a bridge and had no more than a few inches of bath water in the tub. Water made her that nervous. Besides, she was raised during the Depression in Kansas and didn't even know anyone who had ever been on a luxury liner. "Did you ask what the name of the ship was?" I asked. It freaked me out so much I didn't, but I wish I had," Kathy replied. When I walked into the hospital room, there Mom lay on the hospital bed, her breathing labored, her body already skeletal. But what really hit me, Mom's hair was down. This was only the third time in my life that I remember seeing that. That the hairdresser hadn't been called, this was bad, because it meant she had lost the will to live. Kathy stood on the opposite side of the bed, and we made small talk while Mom struggled to breathe. She was hooked up to a machine that went. "Oh, by the way, Lori's pregnant," Kathy said offhandedly. "Is it her husband's?" I asked without thinking. I looked over at Mom, who was left wide-eyed and gasping at the last question. "It's a legitimate question," I said to her as the nurse ran in. My bad. Later, we left the hospital because we had an appointment with the funeral home to make the arrangements. Strangely enough, it was the same funeral home where, years earlier, I had dated someone very briefly who worked for this same mortuary. This was not Daryl, it was another guy. I seemed to be going through a period of dating mortuary workers. Just saying. This guy's job was to drive to the hospitals and pick up the bodies that were going to be handled by this mortuary. He, I can't remember his name, lived in the apartment on the premises that was accessed through the garage. This meant that the caskets with dead folks in them were usually parked in front of his front door, waiting for the next day's funeral. As an aside, the thing I most remember about this apartment was the pair of standing torchère lamps on either side of his bed, with rose-colored bulbs in them. The funeral home used these very same lamps in the viewing rooms at the head and the foot of the casket. It created a certain ambiance, so to speak. I also learned two things during this brief affair. One, that I absolutely cannot get it up when there's a dead person parked outside the front door. And two, if someone asks you to take a cold bath and then lie very still, put your clothes on and go home immediately. I was pondering all of this as we went into the funeral home to make Mom's arrangements. We needed to make them anyway, what with how things were going, better sooner than later. Lori, Dawn, and my niece were there, waiting. When we were called in, Lori brought my niece, who was 10 at the time. Do you think it's a good thing to be bringing her in here like this? I asked. Yeah, Lori said a little belligerently. She's old enough. It was a bone of contention between Lori and Mom that after Dad died, Lori wasn't asked to be in on Dad's funeral arrangements. Never mind that she was only 12 at the time, Lori felt that she herself was the widow and the rightful person to be making the decisions, and it always rankled her that Mom didn't take her along. This was her way of getting back, and my niece played the part well, being a carbon copy of her mother. The counselor, as he was called, reeked of the used car lot and cheap cologne. I remember his very shiny gray polyester suit with some big gold nugget jewelry and lots of oil in his hair and in his manner. He kept suggesting things for your beloved mother that would run the price of this service into the 5 figures at least, one item being the metal casket. Now, I was thinking that my sofa needed reupholstering, and so I was going to do my damnedest to keep from putting more money than necessary into the ground. Mind you, I wanted to do the right thing and give her a dignified send-off, but there are limits, you know? I am my mother's son. Being a practical gal where money was concerned, she would have understood. We were shown to the casket room, where they were all set out under the spotlights, just like new cars, and priced accordingly. Mr. Counselor kept steering us to the metal ones because they have a watertight seal to ensure a dry grave. Lori, of course, was eating this up. Kathy and I were looking at a nice, dignified wooden casket lined in white satin. It had a fruitwood finish, just like Mom's favorite furniture. It was also considerably less money. But we can't guarantee a watertight seal because it's wood, Mr. Counselor implored. We'll take this one, I said firmly. Lori cringed, but knew that Kathy would back me up, so she was outvoted. We had to take Lori aside and remind her that Mom wasn't going to be living there. She would be somewhere else, so comfort really wasn't an issue. We were then led to the vaults. It seems there is legislation that says that a casket needs to be put in some sort of concrete box so the grave doesn't settle as it was put to us, meaning the ground doesn't sink down and crush the casket. There was the minimum standard by law, a concrete box that cost about $100. Mr. Counselor whisked us past that to show us the vault, $10,000, which was, as he put it, lined with the same type of material they use for the nose cones of missiles. This is a direct quote. If you have a wooden casket, you have to have this vault to ensure a dry grave, he exclaimed. Lori again was all over this. I have a question, I said. Yes? You keep using the phrase to ensure a dry grave. Why is that an issue? Well, the look on Mr. Counselor's face told me that he had never heard that question before. He turned and looked at my brother-in-law. Well, Ken has some religious beliefs regarding burial, Don said. What? The counselor asked me. Well, I believe the body should return to the earth, as they say in the Bible, I replied. The gay boy evoking the Bible, get that. How can that happen if you have it sealed up and practically shrink-wrapped? I believe in Jesus Christ, and I believe you can go to heaven when you're buried in one of these vaults, Mr. Counselor thundered. Holding up my hand to stop him talking, I calmly said, Your beliefs are not under discussion here. We'll take the concrete box and the wooden casket. Write it up. I managed to take some time away to visit with friends, but the main thing was to go to the hospital and spend time with Mom. When I went to see her the next morning, Mom seemed confused and upset. She was wide-eyed and trembling. I asked her what was wrong. Where's Mama? She asked. Where's Mama? Her voice was small and scared, almost like a child's voice. Her eyes were wide and scared when she looked at me. But it was her choice of words that hit me like a hammer. Never in my life had I heard Mom refer to Grandma as Mama. It was either your grandmother or mother, but never Mama. This was the question of a child. one who was feeling abandoned and scared, and it absolutely broke my heart. I looked down on this woman who, like a child, just wanted her mama to be there to comfort her. The look in her eyes said it all to me, that she wanted comfort from her mama, but she never got it, especially now when she most needed it. I burned with fury that nobody in that family came. Especially Grandma. Grandma couldn't get out of herself and her narrow little world long enough to come comfort her dying daughter. Mom's favorite sister felt that her liquor store, where she sat on her fat ass for the last 30 years, couldn't be left closed for 2 days so she could visit a dying sister. Since I had escaped that narrow little world, it was strange to me that people could react this way. It certainly explained a lot. How could Mom be present for us kids, as Dennis would say, if she had never experienced it in her own childhood? It would be nice to say that I totally forgave her and was healed and all that in that moment. That didn't happen right then. But I learned an important thing about how she grew up, and this made it possible later when I was able to forgive her. She did the best she knew how.
I'll get the order. Is he there on the computer now?
No, ma'am. I'm working on that. Yeah.
The doctor said that she wasn't going to last as long as they thought. No surprise to me, as Mom was 95 pounds dripping wet when she was healthy, and she was now down to literally skin and bones. Holding her in a sitting position once to help the nurse, I could feel all her vertebrae and ribs like there was only a thin piece of leather covering them. That said, Mom was struggling to take every breath, struggling to keep going. The evening before I was to fly back home, I went to see her. She was watching the TV. I stood at the door and watched her for a time before I went into the room. What I saw was a woman who was too scared to live, but now at the end was scared out of her wits to die. It was heartbreaking, and I had to get myself under control before I went in, otherwise I wouldn't be any comfort to her. And rightly so, it really was all about her right then. She looked up as I entered and smiled weakly. I turned off the TV. I tried to smile, but the tears came anyway. I wiped them away. "Will you brush my hair?" she asked. "You used to like brushing my hair when you were real little. I'd like my hair brushed." So for a while, I brushed her hair and pulled it back in a braid and fussed around about how beautiful she looked now. Then we sat there, quiet, looking at each other. "Mom, this is really hard for me. And I know it's hard for you. I know we're at the end of the line. Know that you did a good job in this life and you raised 3 kids who are all healthy and able to make it on their own. You did a good job, and now your job is done. When you decide, you can go. Don't feel you need to hold on because of us, because we'll be okay. Know that where you're going, there is no anger and there is no fear. Also know that we'll be here praying for you, and that one day you'll be on the other side to greet us." "Kenny?" "Yes, Mom." "I'm worried that you and Lori don't get along." "Mom, that's just what it is, and it isn't your concern anymore. It's between Lori and me now." "Kenny?" "Yes, Mom." "Take care of Kathy." "I will, Mom, I will." "I love you." "I love you too, Mom." I kissed her tenderly on the forehead and sat with her until she drifted off to sleep. It was the last time we would ever speak. In the next episode, I think you can figure out where this is going. Thanks for listening. I'd like to thank BearWorldMagazine.com for sponsoring this podcast. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, and YouTube. If you have questions, you can reach me through the website allgrownupnow.com. You can also follow me on Instagram at Kenneth D. King, on Facebook at Kenneth D. King Design, or on my main website, KennethDKing.com.